There are places in the world that carry silence in a very particular way. Not the peaceful silence of forests, mountains, or rivers. Not the silence of early morning before life begins to stir. But the heavy kind of silence. The kind that settles over places where something has been forgotten. On the outskirts of Buenos Aires province in Argentina, there stood a former zoo. To many people, it had once seemed like just another attraction, a place where families visited, where children pointed at animals behind barriers, where the wild was reduced to something close, manageable, and contained. But behind that illusion was another reality. For years, serious welfare concerns surrounded the facility. Questions grew louder. Criticism became impossible to ignore. And in 2020, the zoo was officially shut down. To the outside world, that might have sounded like the end of a problem. A closed zoo sounds like a chapter finished, a wrong corrected, a system brought to a stop. But for many of the animals still inside, closure did not mean freedom. Even after the gates had closed, many animals remained on site. Their world had not changed. The public was gone, but the confinement remained. The structures were still there. The limitations were still there. And for the animals, the uncertainties stretched on. Years passed. And then in 2025, a new chapter began. That year, an animal welfare team was invited by the government of Argentina and the management of the former zoo to evaluate the situation. It was an important moment, a chance to finally look closely at the reality the animals were still living in. When the team arrived and began their assessment, what they found was deeply troubling. The danger had not passed. The suffering had not ended. The animals' safety, health, and overall well-being were still at risk. This was not a story of a closed facility that had been quietly resolved. It was a story still unfolding, and for the animals left behind, it was urgent. Soon after, the welfare organization took responsibility for the animals at the former zoo. What followed was the beginning of an emergency mission, one that would require enormous effort, difficult decisions, international cooperation, and relentless determination. Among all the animals who needed help, 2 bears stood out. For this story, we will call them Bruno and Liana. Bruno and Liana had spent most of their lives in captivity. Both had arrived at the former zoo when they were still cubs. They grew up not in forests, not in open landscapes, not in the world nature had intended for them, but in artificial enclosures, in an environment that could never truly meet their needs. But behind that illusion was another reality. For a short period, she had shared an enclosure with Bruno, but later they were separated to prevent breeding, and their lives continued in isolation and limitation. Those who knew Liana said she loved water. They noticed her glossy fur and her gentle nature, and perhaps the most heartbreaking thing about her was this. Even in a place that failed her, there were still signs of the life she might have lived. A life with curiosity, a life with natural instincts, a life with freedom. Bruno, just a year younger, was impressive in an entirely different way. He was a large bear, powerful in size, yet surprisingly playful and gentle. The people who had observed him over the years said he enjoyed searching for food and spending time in water. Even in captivity, even in a poor environment, his instincts were still there. The instinct to forage, to explore, to engage, and that mattered. Because it meant that beneath the weight of confinement, beneath the years of inadequate care, the bear he was meant to be had not completely disappeared. But instincts alone cannot protect him from suffering. The conditions Bruno and Liana had lived in were far from what bears need. And for creatures as intelligent and emotionally sensitive as bears, poor husbandry does not only affect the body, it affects the mind. Bears are not meant to spend their lives in barren, restrictive spaces. They are meant to roam, to forage, to swim, to dig, to choose where to rest, to retreat when they want privacy, to experience Their mental well-being had suffered. Their world had become too small, too repetitive, too unnatural. And although emergency improvements were made as soon as the rescue team took over, it was clear that temporary measures would never be enough. The former zoo could not become the home these bears needed. It could only be the place they had to leave behind. By September, the rescue mission was fully underway. The welfare team began improving conditions on site immediately. Husbandry practices were adjusted, the animals' care was reviewed, and preparations began for something much bigger. Not just emergency support, but permanent solutions. Then, in mid-November, the mission reached a major turning point. An extensive veterinary assessment was carried out, one of the largest and most complex operations the organization had ever attempted. More than 60 animals were examined and treated. This was not simply about medical checkups, it was about understanding each animal's condition, identifying urgent needs, and building a path towards a dignified future. Every examination mattered, every diagnosis mattered, every treatment mattered. And for Bruno and Liana, those veterinary assessments would help determine whether a rescue on an international scale could truly become possible. Because moving 2 bears across continents is no small thing. It involves far more than opening a gate and leading them out. A rescue like this demands planning at every level. There are veterinary evaluations, legal permits, government approvals, transport coordination, customized travel crates, quarantine requirements, destination readiness, route planning, dietary management, behavioral preparation, and constant communication between teams in different countries. It is paperwork, it is logistics, it is patience, it is science, it is strategy, and above all, it is commitment. For Bruno and Liana, the team knew one thing with certainty. They needed a new home, not a temporary shelter, not another enclosure of convenience, but a place truly built around their needs as bears. That place was waiting for them in Bulgaria. Far from Argentina, in the mountain landscapes of Galicia, there was a bear sanctuary prepared to offer these 2 animals something they had never really known, a species appropriate for them. There, they could one day explore wooded surroundings, dig into natural ground, rest in quiet spaces, swim in pools, breathe mountain air, and perhaps even hibernate if they chose. To many people, these may sound like simple things, but for a bear, they are everything. They are not luxuries, they are not extras, they are the foundation of a dignified life. And for Bruno and Liana, they represented not just comfort, but possibility. At that point, the rescue became more than hope, it became a promise in motion. The days that followed were filled with preparation, and much of that work happened quietly behind the scenes. While the world often sees the emotional moment of arrival, very few people witness the long and demanding process that makes such moments possible. For Bruno and Liana, this process was immense. Permits had to be secured, international arrangements had to be coordinated, veterinary records had to be reviewed, transport standards had to be met, travel crates had to be introduced carefully and patiently so the bears could become familiar with them rather than fear them. At the same time, the bears continued to receive care at the former zoo under the best conditions the team could provide. Their diets were adjusted, enrichment activities were introduced, caregivers worked to improve their daily routines and prepare them for the stress of relocation. This kind of preparation matters deeply. You can't simply explain to an animal that a crate means safety, that travel means rescue, that a noisy, unfamiliar journey leads to a better life. The animal doesn't know the destination, it only knows the experience in front of it. So trust must be built through calm repetition. For Liana, this process required patience and gentleness. She was observant and cautious, and the team respected her pace. Every small step mattered. Every moment of reduced fear, every sign of curiosity, every sign that she was adapting. For Bruno, food-based enrichment became an important
searching for treats and engaging with his environment, that natural motivation could be used to help him become more comfortable with training and preparation. During his veterinary examination, there was also an important note. Bruno was in generally good health, but he needed to lose weight. Years of restricted living and improper diet had affected his condition. If he was to truly thrive in sanctuary life, his nutrition would need to be adjusted and his body supported towards a healthier balance. But that diagnosis came with hope. Because unlike the years he had lost, this was something that could change. With proper care, movement, and diet, Bruno improved. He could become stronger. He could feel better. He could live differently. As the rescue day drew closer, the pressure grew. There is always tension in a mission like this. So many things must go right. So many people must stay alive. A delay in one document, a transport issue, a health complication, a timing problem. Any of it could affect the mission. And yet, despite the challenges, the team kept moving forward. Because these goals had waited long enough. For years, Bruno and Liana had lived in a world that did not make it. Now, at last, there was a real chance to change that. No one wanted that chance to spread. The day where preparation became action. The day when plans, paperwork, and promises had to carry real weight. The day when Bruno and Liana would leave Argentina behind. There is something deeply emotional about the beginning of a rescue journey. Not because it is easy, but because it marks the moment when suffering is finally interrupted. For Bruno and Liana, this was not just transport, it was transition, a crossing from one life into another. They were accompanied by experienced professionals throughout the journey. Veterinary and rescue experts monitored them closely, ensuring their safety during every stage of the trip. Long-distance transport of large wild animals demands immense care. It is not only about the physical process of movement, it is also about managing stress, ensuring stability, and protecting the animals through an experience they cannot understand. Hour by hour, mile by mile, the mission continued. And then, after everything that led up to it, Bruno and Liana arrived in Bulgaria. Their plane landed in Sofia. Waiting there was a team ready to go. People who had worked toward this moment understood what it meant. They had made it. After so many years in the former zoo, after so much uncertainty, after so much behind-the-scenes effort, the bears were no longer in Argentina. They were no longer trapped in a world that had failed them. They had reached the next stage of rescue. But even then, care remained a priority. Before the final leg of the journey could begin, the bears were checked once again to ensure they were healthy and stable enough to continue. Only when everything was confirmed did the team begin the final transfer to their new home. And finally, Bruno and Liana arrived in Bear Sanctuary, Galicia. For most of us, the new place is something we can understand almost instantly. We know what it means to live, to arrive, to adjust. But for an animal who has spent most of life in deprivation, a new environment is overwhelming in ways we can only imagine. New smells, new sounds, new temperatures, new people, new routines, new air. So the sanctuary team introduced this new chapter carefully. Both bears were placed in individual quarantine enclosures with indoor and outdoor access. For the first 2 days, they remained indoors so they could adapt slowly and safely to the new climate and surroundings. This first step was important. Rescue is not only about giving freedom, it is about giving it responsibility. The sanctuary understood that healing must happen at the animal's pace. Soon, after the initial quarantine period, Bruno and Liana would have the opportunity to explore spacious natural enclosures. For the first time, they would begin to experience a world that offered them choices. And that's what makes sanctuary life so powerful. Choice. The choice to move, the choice to rest, The choice to enter water or stay dry. The choice to dig. The choice to forage. The choice to hide. The simple choice to exist in a place that does not demand performance. For animals who have spent most of life in captivity, choice itself can be transformative. Bruno and Liana had spent most of their lives in conditions that could never truly support them. Confined, understimulated, denied the chance to live as pairs. Now, that was beginning to change. Soon, they would breathe mountain air. They would feel natural ground beneath them. They would have room to move in ways their bodies had always needed. They would encounter enrichments designed not to entertain an audience, but to awaken instinct, curiosity, and well-being. For Liana, this new life promised something especially beautiful. Those who knew her described her as calm, gentle, and sensitive. In a proper sanctuary environment, those qualities could unfold no longer shaped by stress and limitation. Her personality could emerge more freely. Perhaps she would spend long, quiet moments near water, as she had always seen her love. Perhaps she would explore gradually, carefully taking in the scents and sounds of her surroundings. Perhaps she would discover pleasures that captivity had denied her. The feel of earth, the comfort of privacy, the simple joy of engaging with a world that finally made sense. For Bruno, the sanctuary offered his own kind of hope. His playful nature, his love for food searching, his attraction to water, all of these were signs of a bear whose instincts had survived. In Belize, those instincts could now be nurtured properly. With more space and better movement, his body could become healthier. With an adjusted diet, he could lose the excess weight he carried. With stimulation, variation, and expert care, he could begin to thrive. Not survive, but thrive. That distinction matters, because keeping an animal alive is not the same as giving it a life of its own. For the first time, Bruno and Liana had a real chance at a second. There was a painful truth in rescue stories like this one. Lost years cannot be returned. No sanctuary, no matter how beautiful, will give back the power they never fully had. No rescue team can erase the confinement, the missed seasons, the unnatural routines, the psychological toll of self-surrender. Time does not reverse. What rescue can do is change what comes next. And that matters profoundly. Because the future still has weight. The future still has meaning. The future still belongs to the living. Bruno and Liana may have lost years to captivity, but they have not lost the possibility of healing. They have not lost the chance to feel safety. They have not lost the chance to discover comfort, stimulation, and dignity. And dignity is, in many ways, the true heart of this story. Not sentiment, not spectacle, dignity. What does dignity look like for a bear? It looks like space. It looks like clean water. It looks like species-appropriate food. It looks like quiet places to rest. It looks like caretakers who understand natural behavior. It looks like medical attention. It looks like freedom from stressors that never should have existed. It looks like an environment designed around need rather than display. At last, Bruno and Liana have that. Their story is also a reminder of something larger. Closing a harmful place is only the beginning. Real responsibility means asking what happens afterwards. What becomes of the animals once the public is gone home and the headlines fade? Who steps in then? Who carries the burden of living? In this case, rescue happened because people refused to let the story end in closure. Authorities cooperated, experts stepped in, veterinarians worked tirelessly, caretakers adapted routines, transport specialists handled logistics, sanctuary teams prepared new enclosures, supporters made the mission possible. Rescue is never one dramatic act. It is a chain of effort. Someone notices, someone speaks, someone investigates, someone funds, someone treats, someone documents, someone drives, someone waits, someone signs, someone prepares, someone receives. those people do their part and their years from suffering toward safety. That's what happened for Bruno and Liana. Their journey began in neglect and ended in hope. It crossed continents, it demanded persistence, it required courage, precision, and compassion. And now, in a sanctuary in Bulgaria, two bears stand at the edge of a new life. A life with mountain air, a life with natural enclosures, a life with pools, trees, soil, privacy, and care. A life where they are no longer trapped in the remains of a failed system. Now they are not exhibits, they are not forgotten survivors of a closed zoo. They are living beings with a future. And maybe that's the most powerful part of all. Because this story is not only about rescue, it is about community. It is about what happens when suffering is finally interrupted by action. It is about what becomes possible when people choose not to look away. It is about the belief that even after years of neglect, an animal still deserves a better tomorrow. Bruno and Liana do. And now, at last, that tomorrow has begun. Somewhere in the quiet of their new sanctuary, the world is opening around them. The air is different.
The ground is different. The rhythm of life is different. One bear is calm, observant, and gentle. The other is strong, playful, and searching. Both have come farther than distance alone can measure. Behind them is confinement. Ahead of them is possibility. Behind them is deprivation. Ahead of them is care. Behind them is the life they endured. Ahead of them is the life they should have had all along. And so their story